We are Group 4. Today we are going to introduce deep brain stimulation, especially its application for Parkinson's disease. The clinical application of DBS began in the 1980s by French scientist Bambit. DBS is a device that significantly improves quality of life with movement disorders, Alzheimer's disease, and mental disorders. And by delivering constant current to deep areas of the brain, it improves patient symptoms. During the past 20 years, it has already been performed in more than 160,000 patients worldwide. This is the background of our project. Then we would introduce the Parkinson's disease in the second part, following DBS and simulations.
Parkinson's disease is a common progressive neurodegenerative disorder. It usually occurs in people older than 35 years old. 7 to 10 million people worldwide have PD. The disease typically presents 4 movement symptoms: tremor, which means shaking; rigidity, which means muscle stiffness; slowness of the movement; and also the postural instability, which means the poor balance and the coordination. There are 5 stages of Parkinson's disease. In stage 1, symptoms are too minimal to be noticed and appear on one side of the body. Patients' daily tasks aren't affected. In stage 2, the symptoms, like the stiffness, tremor, and change in facial expression, are much more noticeable. In this stage, symptoms appear on both sides of the body. The ability to keep balance will not be affected. Stage 3 is a major turning point. Patients are now more likely to experience loss of balance. Patients' daily tasks are difficult to complete. During stage 4, patients can still stand up by their own. Patients can't live alone, which is dangerous. In stage 5, it's impossible for patients to stand or walk on their own. Losing a large number of dopamine is one of the main factors causing the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Nowadays, there is no way to completely cure the PD. Treatment is mainly focused on symptom management. The goal is to allow the individual to live more comfortable. Nowadays, dopamine replacement therapy is the gold standard way. It's an effective method. However, it has side effects called the wearing off phenomenon. The motor symptoms are becoming worse before a scheduled dose of the dopamine medication. Therefore, supplement dopamine can only be a short-term therapy. We need to figure out alternative methods, such as deep brain stimulation. There are 2 main pathways within the basal ganglia that modulate the movement: the direct pathway, promoting movement production, and the indirect pathway, inhibiting the movement production. Both pathways originate from neurons in the striatum. Activation of D1 receptors in the striatum produces an excitatory effect on the direct path, while activation of D2 receptors produces an inhibitory effect on indirect path. As for healthy people, in the direct pathway, the cortical information from the striatum is transmitted directly to GPI and SNPR, the output nucleus of the basal ganglia. In contrast, the indirect pathway transmits cortical signal from the striatum indirectly from GPE to STN, and there is an excitatory projection from the STN to the output nucleus. For PD patients, dopamine loss in SNPC results in decreased activities of the direct pathway and increased activity of the indirect pathway. The increased activity results in increased inhibition of GPE combined with disinhibition of STN. Taken together, decreased activity from the direct pathway combined with increased activity in the indirect pathway result in a net inhibitory output from the basal ganglia nucleus. Therefore, dopamine loss reduces the overall movement.
Okay, let's come to the deep brain stimulation part. DBS targeting the basal ganglion thalamocortical loop, especially the internal segmentation of GPI, STN, and VIN. It has been widely employed as a successful surgical therapy for movement disorders such as Parkinson's disease. However, the neurophysiological mechanism underlying the action of it remains unclear and is still under debate. There are mainly 3 popular theories to explain this problem. Since DBS gave rise to similar effects of those lesions, it was originally considered to inhibit local neuronal elements, which is called inhibitory theory. Actually, the most common effects of STN or GPI high-frequency stimulation on neighboring neurons was reducing of firing rate. Though it seems to be proven by many animal experiments, recent studies reported activation of neuron elements, which is called excitation theory. Actually, STN-DBS increase activity of GPI neurons through the excitation of STN-GPI projection. As both theory has its insufficiency, the regulation theory becomes popular. Belt provides evidence for it. They found multiple phasic response consisting of excitation and inhibition in GPI neuron during high-frequency simulation. Though DBS has many advantages as a clinical tool, it still has side effects on Parkinson patients both mentally and physically. It could lead to cognitive impairment, numbness and weakness of body, movement disorders, mental disorders, and emotional changes. Disturbance of the verbal fluency is considered to be the most significant causes, since most researchers found it during their researches. As for chronic cognitive decline, it is the main reason for the decline in quality of life of PD patients and the main problem faced by their families. Apart from this, some complications could also happen due to DBS surgery, such as lead migration, fracture, erosion, malfunction. Malfunctioning of neurotransmitters, seizures, dystonesis, and hemorrhage could also happen during surgery. Consider the stuff we talked about DBS about. The future direction of DBS can roughly divide it into four aspects: the technical and clinical improvements, mechanism of DBS, and programming method, which is considered to be useful to improve the device longevity.
The product we chose to investigate is the Apple DBS system, which consists of an implanted pulse generator, the leads, and the extensions. The pulse generator sends programmable current pulses into the target area of the brain through the extensions and the leads. For the simulation, we mainly focused on the signal transfer flow using this kind of product. In this way, we can prove some of the simple conclusions people get in their previous works. Here we assume there are three neurons respectively positioned in the cerebellum, GPI, and motor cortex. Neuron X will send a sine wave signal to neuron Z, which is usually the case when your cerebellum sends a command to your motor cortex. Neuron Y in GPI is a dysfunctional cell in the target area, which is going to interfere with the normal signal flow from X to Z. A random reason of Y signals indicates its dysfunctionality. Otherwise, it will send a sequence of uniformly distributed pulses as we stimulated. Neuron Z receives both signals from X and Y. To represent an excitatory effect of neuron Y, we will add them together, while subtracting them represents an inhibitory effect. We aim to see how much the output signal of Z is correlated with the initial activity of neuron X. Here we got the results. Blue lines are the original signals sending from X. Red lines are the output of neuron Z, which are the commands that will be sent directly down to the muscles. We can see that with stimulated Y, which is the figure on the right hand, we surely can get a signal that is more similar to the initial one. Figure on the left hand are much more noisy. You can imagine if there's such a command sending to muscles, the motion cannot be much controllable. In reality, the command will be much more shapeless, which will cause a tremor. We use different stimulation frequencies to repeat such experiments. Here we make a comparison between them. As we can see, higher frequency leads to smaller variances of the signal similarity. In other words, there will be less uncertainty of the output signals if we stimulate GPI in a higher frequency. This is usually the case that the frequency applied in DBS should range from 50 Hz to 200 Hz. Both inhibition and excitation from stimulated neuron can do well with the transfer, which is a simple proof of the regulation theory. That's all for our